Okay, so this module is about speech. And whenever we talk about speech, I just like to remind everyone that speech and language are not the same thing. So remember, we learned that speech is just one way to externalize language. And we also have other ways to externalize language, like obviously writing, sign, and so forth. So now, having said that, we're going to start this module off by considering a question that has fascinated scientists for a long time. And that is whether speech is a special type of sound for our brains. So do our brains process speech sounds differently from other types of sounds? Do we have specialized mechanisms for processing speech? So now it turns out this is a very hard question because one reason is that in order to be able to approach this question, we have to first have some idea of what makes speech speech. So what's the kind of unique quality of speech that would allow us to design experiments where we distinguish speech from other types of stimuli. And it turns out that that is just very, very difficult to pinpoint. So there's this kind of principled methodological challenge that we face when trying to address this question. So to get warmed up, let's first just consider some sounds. Here, I have a bunch of sounds. They're all from this website that you see a link to at the bottom, freesound.org. Super fun. I warn you, a little bit addictive. And so here we have 8 sounds, and 3 of them are speech, and all the others are not speech. And I'm showing a visualization of the sound wave. So that's just plotting amplitude of the sound, so-called envelope of the sound wave. No other frequency information. It's not like the spectrogram that we looked at earlier. This is just the amplitude. But it gives you some idea of the dynamics of the sound and the rhythm of the sound. Okay, so let's just take a listen to some of them. So which ones do we think might be like speech? So like here, for example, maybe that's a word and that's another word. Let's take a listen to find out. Okay, so it was definitely not speech. It sounded like maybe rain or something like that, like a traffic or something like that. Not quite sure. How about this one? So this is kind of like somewhat abrupt signal, kind of repeating. Maybe that's like a, could be like a word repeating or something like that. Let's see. Not a word. It's a dog barking. Okay. Let's see if that's another dog barking.
Welcome. Welcome. Welcome.
Okay, so that's speech. That's speech. Okay, so obviously this looks like louder than this, or I'm not sure if the scales are at all matched. But so that was speech. That was a dog barking. Let's go over here. Okay, that was some kind of bird. Here we have a little more variability. Let's take a listen.
Life is beautiful. Die Lewe is beeldskoen.
Okay, so that was speech. So first, interestingly, we heard this male speaker was speaking in English, and you immediately also heard it's not a native accent. So you should kind of be surprised by how quickly you were able to also determine that. And then there was another language. Find out in a second which language it was. And you obviously perceive that as speech as well, but now you just couldn't understand it if you don't speak this language, that is. Okay, which ones haven't we looked at? Here's another one.
Just when you thought you'd seen it all. Just when you thought you'd seen it all. Just when you thought you'd seen it all. This happens.
Okay. So that was speech. The sound wave looks pretty different from this one, right? So I want you to notice that, so they're not like physically similar looking. Which ones haven't we? Let's go to this one. Oh. That's another dog barking. Looks different from this dog. What do we have here? Okay, that's a thunderstorm. And I think I haven't clicked this one. No, we did do. So those are the birds. Covered all of them. I think so. Okay. So those were the speech tokens. The foreign language was Afrikaans. Yes, and that was a traffic one. You can listen to all of these files again if you want to on that website. But it's very easy to get stuck on that website. Okay, so the question we want to ask here is, do our brains process speech sounds differently from other sounds? And so now, in order for us to test this question, or to address this question with kind of a typical psychology approach, we would want to devise an experiment in which we, first of all, keep all the physical properties of the stimulus, like the amplitude and the pitch, all those kind of low-level properties, as we sometimes say, constant, because those are ultimately not the aspects of the sound that we're interested in. We're interested in the speechness of the sound, while then varying exactly that. We want to vary whether the stimulus is perceived as speech or not, while keeping all those other things constant. But that's really hard to do. So it's very hard to remove a signal's speech-like quality without also changing its physical properties. So where does that leave us as researchers interested in this question? So in this module, I want to show you two possible sources of data that we can use to address this question. And there are others as well, but I'm going to exemplify two of them. So here's two approaches we can use. One is going back to aphasiology, so we can examine disorders of auditory perception. Okay, so if a person has brain damage, we can ask the question of whether it's possible to lose your ability to perceive speech sounds while keeping your ability to perceive other types of sounds. Is that a possible state of affairs in the world? So does speech perception dissociate from other types of auditory perception? A second approach that we can use is to study the perception of ambiguous stimuli. So stimuli that can either be perceived as speech or not, depending on the circumstances. And so the beauty of this approach is that now you're not trying to control for the physical properties of the stimulus, because the stimulus is the same, but it just has some quality such that you can perceive it either as speech or not, depending on something else that's being manipulated. And we're going to be looking at an example of this, specifically sine wave speech. And so to learn about these two approaches, just move on to the next two bits.